The shuttle's heat tiles still ticked as they cooled when the HFY opened. To the raw air of Cathara, the wind that rushed and smelled like iron and wet leather, an ozone bite that made tongues tingle. Outside, the planes rolled away in ripples of crimson grass, each blade jointed and just flexible enough to sway like the surface of a sleeping sea. Far beyond, basalt spires rose like black teeth, gritted against a bleached sky, eyes forward. "Cadets," came the instructor's voice, brittle through the comms. "Shoulders back. If you faint, do it quietly." Aiden Clark lifted his duffel and stepped down into the light. The ramp vibrated beneath his boots with the throat-sung bass of engines winding down. To his left tramped a line of Sarithians, long-necked and gray, relocating their center of gravity with each patient step. To his right and both above and below, given their habit of hovering, floated three R'lyeh, crystalline, faceted beings, whose internal bioluminescence shifted with emotion like storm light pulsing inside Giadas. The human cohort was smaller than the dome gossip had promised. 25 souls from 12 nations and 2 orbital habitats. Aiden recognized accents as they murmured, Nairobi Hindi, Sao Paulo Portuguese, standard with the clipped vowels of Luna. He thought, unexpectedly, of the crooked little house back in the temperate forests of Earth. Werewolf pups had sometimes followed him home after he left out scraps. He'd learned that a gaze too long meant a challenge, too short meant fear, that playbows needed room, that you never flinched when the smallest set teeth on a sleeve to test. "Keep your distance from the Cathar," the instructor continued. Lieutenant Barak, the name tag read, a compact woman with scarred knuckles and an expression like unblinking glass. "They respect composure. They do not respect squealing. Define distance," muttered someone behind Aiden. "Breath range," Barak said without turning. "If you can feel it, you are too close." Beyond the perimeter's low, wide barricades, Cathar watched. They stood half in shadow, their pelts catching the sunlight with a deep, oil-slick sheen. Color seemed to move across the fur if one didn't look directly. Their eyes threw back gold like hammered metal. Fangs flashed and vanished with each slow breath. They wore armor built like bone, overlapping plaques that flexed around ribs and shoulders, scuffed from use and studded with trophy tags that chimed faintly in the wind. "Welcome to the Joint Tactical Cohort, Class 471, Barak said, lifting a fist. 3 months of integration training, shared tactics, shared meals, shared bunks, shared consequences. You are here to learn exactly how your assumptions break." A laugh light, almost musical, ripened into a growl and then into something like thunder. A Cathar stepped forward, taller than any human by a head and a half, shoulders banded with muscle that moved under fur like ropes under a sail. He carried no visible weapon. He didn't need one. "Commander Ractor," Barak said. "Our host." The Cathar lifted one hand, palm out, claws sheathed. "Cadets," he rumbled in crisp galactic, his accent a low burr. "Welcome to Cathara. Your instructors know how to keep you alive. We know how to make you worth saving." His gaze passed over them like a blade held flat. "You will learn to smell a storm an hour before it breaks, to read a footfall in ash, to hear honesty and fear in the rhythm of a heart." Aiden swallowed. The wind shifted, and with it came a smell he could not place at first. Warm fur, clean metal, hot dust, and something sharp sweet, like crushed cedar sap. Ractor's head tilted. "Some of you will try to impress us by shouting. Do not. Some of you will try to impress us by shrinking. Do not. We respect stillness. We respect truth." The Cathar commander lifted his muzzle to the sky and made a low, layered sound. It vibrated through the bones more than the ears, a tone that seemed to map the shape of the horizon into the body. A chorus answered from the spires, higher, quicker, other units responding. A call and status rolled through sound. The cadets shifted, some unconsciously reaching for their translators even though the meaning had been rendered into their implants. "Unit whole. Field clear. Guests within the circle. Move," Barak said. "Follow the markers to orientation dome 1. They filed across the landing field, and the ground changed underfoot from smooth pan to textured plates that flexed microscopically with their weight. The Cathar didn't pave so much as weave. Structures rose like grown ribs from the earth, forming domes and tunnels and balconies, architecture civilized into bone shape and tendon arc. Wind chimed small bells somewhere high and out of sight. Aden kept his eyes soft and his breathing steady. Beside him drifted Lyra, one of the relay, facets flickering curious blues. Your pulse just accelerated, she observed, voice clear in his implant. Altitude, Aden lied. Lyra's glow warmed Teal amusement. She changed the subject, pointing with a precise glint. Look. What Aden had thought was a shadow detached itself from the legs of a Cathar sentinel and darted toward the path. It was smaller than the others, half their height, sporting ears too large for its head and paws that seemed uncertain where to land in what order. Its fur was a mottled tapestry of storm gray and rust. Its eyes, the color of honey taken at sunset. A cub. The Cathar adult laid a restraining hand on the young one's shoulder. The cub went still, muscles quivering. The adult knelt, murmured something soft and simple and, from the cadence, unmistakable, observe first. But curiosity is a vector as good as any. The cub's nose lifted, flared. Aden felt the weight of its attention like heat on a skin sensor. It stepped around the adult's hand with a feline fluidity that announced play, not disobedience. 3 quick paces, then a spring. Don't, someone began. The cub halted a meter from the human cohort. It crouched. Its tail swished, drawing an elegant S in the dust. The ears flicked forward. Claws slid out, not fully, not for injury, just enough to find purchase. Its lips peeled back from milk-white fangs. It growled. It was not a roar. It was not rage. It was the sound Aden remembered from the woods when the smallest wolf pup had planted its paws and told a stick, "You are mine." A vibration that said, "I am here. See me. Will you match me?" Every other cadet froze. Hands twitched toward holsters they had been told not to touch. One Sarithian let out a low piping hum that meant alarm. Lyra's glow crashed too hard amber. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Aden did not. He had learned early that fear has a choreography, and predators read it like a score. He slid his duffel down and held out both hands, fingers spread, palms empty. He let his own breath drop, not faster but deeper. He bent at the hips until his eyes were level with the cub's, careful to keep his chin tucked. Not challenging, not prey, present. Lyra's voice thinned to a thread. Aden, do not. He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head and, without consulting the translation implant, he let a sound rise from the place that remembered forests and dusk and laughter. He put it in his chest, not his throat. He let it roll rather than tear. And when he spoke, it wasn't words. He growled back. It wasn't perfect. Humans lacked the resonant sacs and the double larynx of Victor. But the rhythm was right. Calm at the start, a playful lift at the end. An invitation. Shock traveled through the cohort like a wave through tall grass. A guard's hand twitched, stopped. Even Commander Ractor's ears pricked. The cub blinked. The growl hiccuped into a chirr, surprise dressed as delight. It took one step, then another, then closed the distance with a bounce that sent dust spooling up around its paws. Aden held his ground. The little body collided with his chest and found him solid enough not to topple, soft enough to climb. Tiny teeth found the fabric of his sleeve and tested the weave. Claws hooked, then politely sheathed. The cub's purr began, a physical thing, a motor that seemed to rattle the air molecules nearby into kindred vibration. The human cohort didn't breathe. The Cathar didn't move. Aden laughed. It burst out of him before he could consider protocol, the kind of laugh that happens when something is exactly itself and exactly right. The cub startled at the sound and then, with the speed of a thought, laughed too in its own language, a rapid series of snorts and growls that skittered up the register. Like water hitting hot stone, the guard who had tried to restrain the cub exhaled. A gust that carried the memory of worry turned to fondness. Commander Ractor stepped forward, the bells on his trophies whispering, "Brave little human," he said, voice pitched to reach Aden without shattering the tension. "Few of your kind understand that a cub's growl is a handshake." Aden shifted the cub so it wasn't hanging by sleeve alone. He rubbed gently where head met ear, watching for flinch. There was none. "Where I'm from," he said, "some handshakes involve teeth." A ripple of approval, soft but unmistakable, moved through the cluster of Cathar. One of them, older, with a scar that had split and healed across the nose, inclined her head. "The sound you made had good bones," she observed. You listened before you answered. Barak's voice crackled dry in the cohort channel. Stand down. This cadet appears to have survived his own decisions. The laughter that followed on the human channel was shaky, like thawing ice. Ractor lowered himself until his gaze was level with Aiden's. Up close, Aiden could see the microbraids at the commander's temples, woven with threads of black metal and dried grass. The braids chimed faintly when he turned his head, a personal weather of sound. Name, Ractor said. Aiden Clark, Aiden Clark. The commander tasted it, separating and rejoining the syllables with care. You will learn to mark your mirth. On our world, it is a promise. I laugh because I am not afraid. I laugh because I am with you. The cub, whose claws were presently investigating the seam of Aiden's collar, made a belated effort at dignity and slid back to the ground in a tumble of paws. It planted itself by Aiden's boot and pressed its shoulder against his shin. With the trust of the very young. Name? Aiden asked gently, glancing at the older Kthr. The scarred female flicked an ear. Sarek, she said. Third of my line. Sarek puffed, sat taller, and let out a tiny growl meant for form's sake. Aiden felt rather than heard the rhythm of it. I am Sarek. Remember me. I will. Aiden said softly. Orientation Dome 1 accepted them with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, the light shifted to a lavender that took the edge off the glare, and a cooling mist rose from the floor vents, carrying the scent of crushed herbs. Benches were grown rather than built, extrusions from the dome walls like petrified waves. The projector at the center winked to life and painted the air with a striped panorama of Cathara's weather systems. The way storms collapsed into heat and thunder at sunset. The way predators hunted by shadow more than sight. The way sound behaved differently in the deep canyons. Wrong footing even veterans dot while briefings unspooled nutrition schedules, hazard maps. The taboo against pointing with a finger on Cathar Soile Den felt Sarek's presence. At the edge of his boot, the cub would creep an inch closer, pause, creep again. Then, when it thought no one was looking, it would flatten itself on Aiden's laces and pretend to be asleep. Each time Barak barked a question, Sarek would open one eye as if to assess whether this new human retained value. The cohort's nerves thawed into curiosity. When the projector displayed a map of the training grounds, Lyra raised a facet. The canyon acoustics invert phase at specific frequencies. Is that intentional? It is honest, Ractor said. The canyon does not lie about what it is. The map lies for you so you may learn the truth. Barak's mouth twitched the nearest she could come to a smile. Without violating some internal regulation, you will each receive a partner species for cross-training, she said. You will eat what they eat and walk as they walk. You will earn the right to ask questions by surviving the day without asking foolish ones. Define foolish, someone dared again. Barak's eyes slid to Aiden, then to the cub. Foolish questions are the ones your blood already answered. The dome's iris opened at the far side. Cathar quartermasters entered with packs that looked like they had been spun by spiders the size of cattle, webbed, light, impossible to rip. They dropped one at each cadet's feet. Aiden's unfurled into compartments as it touched the floor, as if sniffing the air to decide what gear to present first. Stow your ego on top, Barak said, so we can throw it out when we check your bags. Laughter again, less brittle this time. Aiden tucked his duffel within the new pack and found, behind the expected rations and medstrip and water skin, a coil of something like rope that wasn't rope at all, living fiber that flexed, and learned the hand that held it. When the cadets filed out for their first field walk, the cub rose as if attached to Aiden by elastic. The scarred female Sarek's elder watched with a satisfied gravity that reminded Aiden of old teachers who had seen trouble marching up the path and let it come. At the threshold, Ractor paused them with a lifted hand. You will be tempted to measure everything here against your homes, he said. You will be tempted to keep a ledger of what is civilized and what is not. Tear up the ledger. Cathara is not your home. It is not uncivilized. It is itself. You will either learn its shape or you will be skinned by it. The wind freshened. Bells sang high and thin from the bone balconies. Outside, the crimson grass leaned and muttered. The sky had taken on a faint green along the western edge, a harbinger of the brief, violent dusk storms that would race the plains later. Aden stepped through the iris into that bright, raw air. Sarek trotted beside him, tail tipped up in a flag of childish triumph. The cohort moved as one organism with many hearts, their shadows long and clean on the woven ground dot behind them. In the cool lavender light of the dome, Barak marked something on her tablet and said, not unkindly, "Let's see which of you learns to listen before you try to lead." Raptor watched the human with the laughing growl vanish into the day and, low enough that only the scarred female heard, said, "Sometimes the bridge arrives on for soft paws." The female's whiskers curled in agreement. On the plains, Aden let the wind fill his lungs. He thought of home. He thought of the wolf pups and their small, serious faces and how trust had always been a muscle you worked, not a gift you kept and opened on a shelf. He glanced down. Sarek glanced up. For a heartbeat, both saw the other not as strange but as inevitable. The storm line began to form at the horizon, a delicate seam in the sky, and the day moved toward its first test. The twin sons of Cathara had just begun their long, uneven descent when the cadets of Class for 7-1 were marched out onto the Krethval, the great training field that stretched for kilometers beyond the perimeter walls. Out here, the air was sharper, the ground firmer, and the wind carried strange harmonics as it rolled across the plains. As though the planet itself hummed under its breath, the field was not empty. Cathar warriors moved in loose, predatory formations across the expanse, their fluid, deliberate gait resembling something between a stalking cat and a parade march. Some practiced with bladed weapons that curved like crescent moons, their edges pulsing faintly with ionized charge. Others ran brutal hand-to-hand drills that ended in sudden, bone-shaking throws. And on the far side, a pack of older cubs tussled under the watchful gaze of their handlers, snarling and snapping in what was clearly structured play but looked, to the untrained eye, like a death match. Remember, Lieutenant Barak barked as they lined up at the observation edge. To the Cathar, play is practice, and practice is life. There is no clean line between the two. Aden stood near the front of the formation, his pulse quickening despite himself. Since the encounter with Sarek, he had felt a subtle shift in the way the Cathar regarded him. They no longer stared with that hard, measuring hostility that had greeted them on arrival. Now, there was curiosity, still predatory, still assessing, but tinged with something closer to respect. Even the older warriors had begun to watch him out of the corners of their golden eyes, as if trying to decide if this strange, soft-skinned creature could truly understand them. That it wasn't that the other cadets disliked Aden. If anything, they admired his composure, but they're always laced with unease. What he had done with Sarek on the first day, rolling back, laughing, touching the cub, had unsettled the carefully built wall of caution they were clinging to. "Do you even realize how insane that was?" hissed Lyra, her crystalline facets flashing an irritated orange as they walked. "If that cub had been older, your throat would have been gone before you blinked." "Maybe," Aden said lightly, "but I'd like to think it still would have been worth it." Lyra's light shifted toward a dull, wary blue. "You're playing a dangerous game." He smiled without answering. Deep down, he knew she was right, but there was something in the Cathar, the way they moved, the way they tested everything around them, that resonated with him. It reminded him of wolves, yes, but also of something deeper, the primal language that all living things shared long before words evolved, and he was determined to speak it. They spent the afternoon learning the basics of Cathar communication and movement. Commander Ractor led the session himself, his presence commanding even when he said nothing at all. Language is more than sound. He lectured as they mimicked stances and gestures. "Among my people, words are secondary. It is the body that speaks first, the spine that declares truth, the tail that betrays lies." He demonstrated how a subtle shift of weight could mean the difference between challenge and surrender. How a growl pitched low could be a greeting while the same sound pitched high was an insult. "Your species," Ractor said, casting his gaze over the humans, "hides behind words. You talk so much, you forget to mean anything. Here, your mouth will not save you. Your heartbeat will." The drills were exhausting, but strangely exhilarating. Aden found himself picking up nuances quickly, his instincts guiding him more than conscious thought. At one point, Ractor himself paused beside him, studying the human's posture as Aiden mirrored a traditional Cathar greeting stance. "You learn fast," the commander rumbled. Aiden shrugged. "I've had a lot of practice with dogs." That earned a sound halfway between a chuckle and a growl. "Dogs," Ractor repeated. "Perhaps they taught you more than your species realizes." By the time the suns dipped low and cast long, blood-red shadows across the field, the cadets were dismissed to rest. Most of them collapsed onto the grass in exhausted silence, drinking in lungfuls of cool air. Aiden, however, remained standing, drawn toward the edge of the field where a group of Cathar cubs were still playing. There were 5 of them, all slightly older than Sarek, though still young enough that their movements had a clumsy exuberance to them. They chased each other in tight circles, pouncing and rolling, taking turns pinning one another to the ground. Their handlers watched with mild amusement, occasionally barking a correction in the deep, throaty growls of their language. And then Aiden felt a familiar stare. Sarek had spotted him. The cub froze mid-pounce and turned his head. His golden eyes locked onto Aiden's, and a slow, unmistakable recognition passed between them. Then, without hesitation, Sarek padded away from the pack and began walking directly toward the human. The cadets noticed almost immediately. Conversations faltered. Bodies stiffened. Even Barak's expression tightened into something like apprehension. Clark, muttered Juno, a broad-shouldered Martian recruit beside him. "It's coming right for you." "Yeah," Aiden murmured. "I see that." Sarek stopped a few meters away, his body lowering into that now familiar crouch. His ears angled forward, tail twitching behind him. A deep rumble built in his chest, louder, more confident this time. He wasn't a newborn cub anymore. He was testing Aiden again, challenging him. The other cadets went rigid. "Oh no," Lyra whispered. "Not again." Sarek growled. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate the ground. The other cubs paused their play, watching intently. Even the handlers took a step closer, their eyes narrowing. The message was unmistakable. "Show me what you are." Aiden didn't flinch. He let the growl roll over him like thunder and waited until the silence stretched thin. Then, deliberately, he exhaled through his nose, widened his stance, and lowered himself until he mirrored the cub's posture. The field had gone completely still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then he growled back. This time, it wasn't a hesitant mimicry. It was a full-bodied, chest-deep rumble, resonating from his diaphragm and spilling into the air like the answer to an ancient riddle. It wasn't perfect. No human voice could truly match the layered complexity of a Cathar vocalization. But it carried intent, playful, bold, equal. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Sarek barked a delighted chuff and bounded forward, launching himself at Aiden with far more force than before. The impact nearly knocked him over, but Aiden caught his balance just in time, laughing as the cub tackled his chest and started nipping harmlessly at his sleeves. The rest of the cadets gasped, some stumbling backward, others instinctively reaching for their weapons. But Aiden was laughing, a deep, unrestrained, utterly human laugh that rang across the training field and shattered the tension like glass. Sarek responded in kind, emitting a series of rapid growls and playful snarls as he wrestled with Aiden's arms. It was unmistakable now. They weren't enemies. They were playing. The older Cathar handlers exchanged glances, some amused, some clearly impressed. Commander Ractor himself strode over, his mouth curving into what might have been the closest his species came to a smile. Once again, "Human," he said, "you speak without words." Aiden grinned, still holding the squirming cub. "Guess we're getting good at understanding each other." The commander's eyes gleamed. "Do you know what you have just done? I hope I haven't broken any laws." Ractor's laugh was a rumble of approval. "You have accepted his challenge, and he has accepted your strength. Among my people, this is how lifelong bonds are forged." A hush fell over the cadets, even the most skeptical among them, those who had called Aiden reckless. Behind his back looked at him differently now. The bond between predator and human wasn't just tolerated, it was honored. Ractor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low growl meant only for Aiden's ears. "Remember this moment, Clark. In the battles to come, a bond like this may mean the difference between survival and death, not just for you, but for your entire pack." As the suns finally dipped below the horizon and the field dissolved into the violet haze of dusk, the cadets returned to their barracks, silent and thoughtful. For the first time since their arrival, they had witnessed something profound, a connection not built on treaties or orders, but on instinct raw and unfiltered. Lyra floated alongside Aiden as they walked back. "I still think you're insane," she said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Maybe," Aiden said, "but it feels like the right kind of insane." Sarek padded beside him, his golden eyes bright even in the fading light. And as they entered the barracks together, predator and human, side by side, the other cadets parted to let them pass, their fear slowly giving way to something new. Respect. And perhaps, though none of them would say it yet, the first stirrings of trust. The days that followed Sarek's challenge blurred into a rhythm of discipline and discovery. Dawn began with drills under the blood-orange sky when the twin suns cast long, savage shadows across the plains of Cathara. The afternoons were filled with language immersion, hand-to-claw combat techniques, and fieldcraft lessons that left every cadet bruised, humbled, and exhausted. Evenings, however, belonged to the integration sessions, mandatory cross-species team exercises designed to tear down walls and build instinctive trust. For most cadets, those sessions were awkward affairs of forced cooperation and misunderstandings, but for Aiden, Clark, and Sarek, they were natural. Something between them had changed on the training field. That day the growl had been more than a game. It was a promise, a declaration that neither saw the other as alien anymore. They were pack, and that bond was about to be tested in a way neither of them could imagine. The announcement in the 12th day of training. As the twin suns burned high overhead and the crimson grass rippled under a hot wind, Commander Ractor summoned the cohort to the central briefing dome. He stood at the center platform, flanked by two of the oldest Cathar veterans, their scarred faces carved with the weight of countless battles. Around them, holographic displays glimmered to life, maps of rugged canyons, dense forests, and wide-open hunting plains, each marked with glowing red symbols. "Cadets," Ractor began, his deep voice echoing off the dome's curved walls. "For nearly 2 weeks, you have learned to crawl in each other's shadows. You have mimicked our movements, practiced our calls, and studied our ways. But imitation is not understanding." He let the silence stretch before continuing. "Now, you will prove whether you have learned anything at all." A hush fell over the room. Aiden felt his pulse quicken. "You stand on the edge of the Zal trial, what you call the trial by instinct. It is the oldest rite of our warrior schools, unchanged in 10,000 cycles. In this trial, we do not measure how well you can aim a rifle or how quickly you can memorize a battle plan. We measure only this: whether your instincts and the instincts of your pack will keep you alive." A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed through the cadets. Barak stepped forward, her tone sharp and efficient. "The rules are simple. You will be deployed into the Tethra Wilds, one of the most unpredictable regions of this world. You will not have full weapons. You will not have long-range comms. All you will have is a knife, a locator beacon, and the partner we assign you. You will survive. You will adapt. And if necessary, you will fight." "Fight what?" asked Juno, his voice tight. Ractor bared his teeth, not quite a smile. "Predators, machines, each other. The wilds decide." The room fell silent again. Barak gestured toward a holodisplay listing pairings. Names flickered and locked into place. As expected, Aiden's appeared next to Sarek's. Aiden glanced down at the cub-turned juvenile beside him. Sarek's tail flicked once in satisfaction. "We hunt together," the young Cathar said in halting galactic standard. "Yeah," Aiden replied, unable to hide his grin. "We do." The wild Tethra Wilds were nothing like the plains near base. The moment the dropship's ramp hissed open, a wave of damp, earthy air rolled in, carrying the sense of rot, moss, and life older than language. The canopy above was a tangled cathedral of alien trees, their roots like serpents coiled across the ground, their leaves shimmering with bioluminescent veins. The light here was strange green and gold, filtered and fractured, and the silence was alive with clicks, chirps, and the low, distant roars of unseen things. "Stay close," Aiden murmured as they stepped off the platform. Sarek inhaled deeply, tasting the air with a flick of his tongue. Many scents, many watchers, They moved carefully through the underbrush, every sense on edge. The trial had begun the moment their boots touched soil, and already the forest felt like it was watching them. For hours they navigated the labyrinth of the wild scaling root systems, crossing shallow streams and pausing often to listen. Once, a creature the size of a hoverbike burst from the ferns ahead, its scaled hide flashing iridescent in the light. It sniffed the air, hissed, and vanished again into the shadows. Was that part of the trial? Aiden whispered. No, Sarek replied, ears flat. That was the forest. They were being stalked, not by the artificial threats planted by the instructors, but by the living predators of Cathara itself, the trappy that time dusk approached. They had found shelter in the hollow of a massive fallen tree. The air was cooler now, but the jungle was louder alive, with the calls of nocturnal hunters waking from their daytime. Slumber, we rest here, Sarek said, curling his tail around his feet. But not sleep. One watches. One waits. Aiden nodded and volunteered for first watch. The forest hummed and shifted around him as darkness fell. The air thickened with mist, and shapes moved beyond the edge of his vision. His fingers hovered near the hilt of the knife at his belt. That was when he heard it, a faint metallic click, followed by the soft hiss of pneumatics, down. He shouted. A split second later, a net of glowing filament exploded from the tree line, aimed directly at their shelter. Aiden rolled, dragging Sarek with him as the trap slammed into the ground where they had been sitting. From the shadows, figures emerged, humanoid but unmistakably mechanical. Their plating was matte black, their movements too precise to be organic. 100 drones, Sarek growled, lips curling back over his teeth. Trial machines, he spat. We fight. There was no time to think. One of the drones lunged forward, claws unfolding from its arms. Aiden ducked under the swipe, slashing upward with his knife and slicing through a bundle of exposed servos. The machine staggered, but didn't fall. Another pounce from behind, but Sarek was faster. He launched himself onto its back, teeth sinking into a seam of armor, tearing it open with a guttural snarl. Sparks burst as the machine convulsed and crashed to the ground. For several minutes, the clearing was chaos, metal against flesh, instinct against programming. Aiden and Sarek fought like a single organism, moving in unspoken coordination. When Aiden ducked, Sarek leapt. When Sarek distracted, Aiden struck. And when the last drone fell, smoking and twitching in the mud, they stood back to back, panting and bloodied but alive. Are you hurt? Aiden asked, chest heaving. Sarek licked a shallow cut on his forearm. Only hungry, Aiden laughed breathlessly. You're impossible. The hunt next day was worse. The deeper they ventured, the more dangerous the trial became. Drones began to appear in pairs and trios. Traps became more elaborate, and natural predators, real ones, began to close in, drawn by the smell of blood and machine oil. It was on the third day, just as exhaustion and hunger were gnawing at them, that the real test arrived. They had been tracking a fresh water source when the forest suddenly fell silent. The background chorus of insects, birds, and beasts vanished in an instant. The air grew heavy. Sarek froze, hackles raised. Something hunts us, he whispered. Aiden didn't have time to reply before the trees moved. What stepped into the clearing was massive, easily 4 meters tall. Its body a coiled blend of muscle, fur, and armor plates that grew from its spine like natural shields. 6 eyes glowed amber in the dim light. Its jaws, lined with serrated teeth, opened to unleash a roar that shook the ground. Not part of the trial, Sarek breathed. That is wild. The creature lunged. They scattered, diving behind opposite trees as claws the size of machetes tore through the soil. Where they'd been standing, Aiden's heart thundered in his chest. A direct fight was suicide. They needed a plan. Sarek, he shouted over the creature's snarls. Flank it, draw its eyes. I'll aim for the throat. Sarek didn't hesitate. He leapt into view, growling and taunting the beast with sharp, darting movements. It swung toward him with a roar, distracted for just a moment, enough for Aiden to sprint forward. Knife in hand, he drove the blade into the exposed flesh under its jaw. The creature howled, thrashing wildly. Sarek lunged, teeth finding the same wound and tearing deeper. Together, human and predator brought the beast crashing to the forest floor. The ground trembled as its final breath rattled through the trees. For a long time, Neither of them spoke. They just stood there covered in mud and blood, chests heaving, adrenaline still burning through their veins. Then, slowly, Sarek turned his head toward Aden. "Pack," he said softly. "Yeah," Aden murmured. "Pack." The beacon 3 days later, gaunt and filthy but triumphant. Aden and Sarek emerged from the wilds and activated their locator beacon. A retrieval craft swooped down minutes later, its searchlights cutting through the misty canopy. When they stepped off the ramp back at base, the entire cohort was waiting. Some were battered and limping. Others bore fresh scars. A few had not made it at all. But every single gaze turned to Aden and Sarek with something new. Not curiosity, not wariness, respect. Commander Ractor approached them silently. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied them, as if weighing something invisible. Then he nodded once deeply. "You did more than survive," he said. "You trusted. You adapted. You became." Sarek bared his teeth in a grin. "We hunted well." Ractor's own lips curled upward. "Indeed, young one, indeed." Aiden's legs felt weak, but his chest swelled with pride. The trial had been brutal, terrifying, and real, but it had also proved something he had always suspected. That instinct was a language older than words, and when spoken truly, it could bind even predator and prey into a single, unstoppable force. As the sun set behind them, staining the training field gold and crimson, Sarek nudged Aiden's hand with his snout. "Next hunt," the young Cathar said with a growl of anticipation. "We find bigger prey." Aden laughed, exhausted but exhilarated. "Next time," he said, "we start with something that doesn't try to eat us." And somewhere high above the field, as dusk deepened into night, the stars of the Galactic Union burned bright and cold, silent witnesses to a bond that was no longer man and beast, or soldier and trainee. It was Pack now, and Pack was stronger than anything the universe could throw at them. The Zal trial ended, but its consequences did not. When the dropships carried the surviving cadets back from the Tethra wilds, they were no longer raw recruits. They were blooded, hardened, changed. Something primal had shifted in their eyes, something that no amount of classroom lectures or tactical simulations could ever forge. For Aden, Clark, and Sarek, that change was deeper still. They had not just survived, they had thrived. They had hunted together, bled together, and in the space between heartbeat and breath, they had stopped being human and Cathar. They were Pack, and the galaxy was about to test that bond harder than either of them could have imagined. A rumbling stormed 2 weeks after their return. The training base was shaken awake in the dead of night. The alarm klaxons were different from the usual drill sirens, lower, longer, and far more urgent. Aden sat bolt upright in his bunk before his mind even processed the sound. Around him, cadets scrambled into gear, adrenaline replacing sleep in a heartbeat. "Emergency deployment." Lieutenant Barak's voice thundered over the intercom. "All cadets to readiness stations. This is not a simulation." Sarek was already at the door, claws flexing, eyes burning with instinct. "This smell," he hissed, nostrils flaring. "Not training. Not ours." Aden pulled on his field harness and checked his pulse rifle. The first time they'd been issued live weapons. "Then it's real." They joined the flood of recruits surging into the main hangar. The air buzzed with tension. Instructors barked orders while ground crews rushed to arm dropships with heavier ordnance. Even Commander Ractor stood at the center of the chaos, his usually calm demeanor replaced with something much sharper. Barak strode to the assembled cadets. "Listen closely," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Long-range sensors have detected an unauthorized incursion into Cathara's orbit. The signature matches Varkan raiders, slavers and mercenaries known for striking young colonies and training worlds. Their landing craft have breached atmosphere." Murmurs rippled through the ranks. The Varkan were infamous, reptilian marauders who struck without warning, taking prisoners and stripping planets bare before retreating into deep space. "Our defense fleet is hours away," Barak continued. "Until then, we hold the line. Every warrior, every cadet, you will fight." The gravity of her words sank in. They weren't trainees anymore. They were soldiers, and this was war, into the teeth within the hour. Aden and Sarek were aboard a dropship racing toward the crash zone. a valley to the north where Varkan craft had pierced the atmosphere. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms as the ground rushed up beneath them. Expect heavy resistance. Scanners show at least 30 hostiles with ground vehicles and drone support. They're moving toward the base perimeter. Aiden checked his weapon again, hands steady despite the pounding of his heart. "We've got this," he said, more to himself than anyone. Sarek crouched beside him, every muscle coiled. "We hunt," he said, a savage glint in his eyes. Together, the ramp hissed open and chaos greeted them. The valley floor was aflame. Blackened wreckage scattered across crimson grass, plumes of smoke clawing into the sky. Varkan soldiers, scaled, armored, and wielding energy rifles, were already advancing, their guttural war cries echoing off the canyon walls. Explosions thundered in the distance as Cathar warriors clashed with raider squads. "Clark, Sarek," Barak's voice snapped through their earpieces. "Your unit will flank the enemy's eastern push. They're trying to encircle the base from the ridge. Stop them at all costs." "Copy that," Aiden replied. They moved fast, weaving through burning debris and shattered drones. Around them, other cadets fought with grim determination, no longer practicing drills but fighting for their lives. The air stank of scorched metal and ozone. Every shot fired was lethal, every mistake fatal dot as they neared the ridge. Aiden spotted movement ahead, a squad of Varkan soldiers setting up a heavy plasma cannon that could tear through the base's defenses. "Target sighted," he whispered. "We take them before they fire." Sarek bared his teeth. Fast, silent, they split, Aiden circling wide through a grove of twisted trees, Sarek slinking low through the underbrush. The raiders barked orders to each other, unaware of the danger closing in. At Aiden's signal, they struck. Aiden dropped the first guard with a precision shot to the chest. Sarek exploded from the shadows, a blur of claws and fangs, tackling a second raider to the ground and tearing through its armor with primal fury. The others spun in panic, firing wildly, but they were too slow. Aiden weaved through their fire, dropping to more before they could react. The cannon team was down. The ridge was secure, but there was no time to celebrate. Through the smoke and chaos, Aiden saw it, a massive Varkan dropship descending toward the valley floor. Far larger and more heavily armed than the rest. "Reinforcements," he growled. "Big ones," Sarek ears flattened. "Then we stopped them here." The final stand new wave of Varkan troops was unlike the first. These were elite shock units, towering, heavily armored, and coordinated. They moved as one, sweeping the battlefield with relentless precision. The defenders were pushed back meter by meter. "Clark, fall back." Barak's voice barked through the comm. "We're regrouping at the secondary line." But Aiden wasn't listening. He was watching the dropship's cargo ramp and the massive siege walker lumbering down it, a four-legged war machine bristling with plasma cannons and missile pods. Its armor too thick for standard infantry weapons. If it reached the base, it was over. "Barak," Aiden said, breathless. "That walker, if it gets through, we're finished." "I know," she replied grimly. "Heavy weapons are inbound, but they'll be too late." Aiden looked at Sarek. The young Cathar met his gaze without hesitation. "Crazy plan?" Sarek asked. "The craziest," Aiden said. They broke from cover before anyone could stop them. The walker loomed ahead, its cannons charging with a high-pitched whine. Aiden fired at its sensor cluster, drawing its attention, while Sarek darted along the flank, his powerful legs propelling him up onto the machine's rear leg. He scrambled upward, claws finding purchase in the gaps of its armor. Almost there, Aiden shouted, sprinting to the base of the walker and climbing after him. Plasma blasts tore the ground apart around them, but they didn't stop. They climbed higher and higher until they reached the machine's back, a nest of glowing conduits and exposed reactor cables. "This is it," Aiden yelled. "Tear it open." Sarek roared and drove his claws deep into the machinery, ripping through wires and coolant lines. Sparks exploded around them. Aiden planted his final charge, a demolition pack from his kit, into the exposed reactor housing. "Pack together," Sarek growled. "Pack forever." Aiden replied. They leapt from the walker just as the charge detonated. The explosion lit the valley like a second sunrise. The siege walker buckled, convulsed, and then collapsed in on itself, a smoking ruin. The Varkan lines faltered, their advance breaking under the sudden loss of their war machine. The defenders seized the moment, rallying with a renewed, savage fury. Within the hour, the raiders were in full retreat, their dropships clawing desperately for orbit. Cathara was safe. The bond forged in Fereth battlefield fell silent save for the crackle of burning wreckage and the hiss of cooling metal. Medical teams moved among the wounded. Cadets leaned against their rifles, too exhausted to cheer. Aden sat in the dirt, helmet off, staring up at the now clear sky. Beside him, Sarek slumped against his shoulder, fur singed, armor scarred, but alive. Commander Ractor approached them slowly. He was bleeding from a deep gash along his side, but his golden eyes were bright with pride. "You disobeyed orders," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," Aden answered. "You risked your lives without permission." "Yes, sir." Ractor's lips peeled back in a fierce grin. "And in doing so, you saved hundreds." He extended a clawed hand, not in reprimand, but in respect. "From this day forward, you are no longer cadets. You are warriors. And more than that." He glanced at Sarek. "You are pack leaders." Sarek lifted his head proudly. "We hunt well, you do," Ractor agreed. "And one day, others will follow your trail." Epilogue. A new legacy. Weeks later, the Academy held a ceremony beneath the twin suns. Medals were awarded, commendations read. But the moment that mattered most came when Ractor addressed the assembled cadets and warriors. "Long ago," he said, "our kind feared humans, and they feared us. We thought ourselves too different, too bound by instinct and history to ever trust one another. But today, a human and a Cathar stood side by side. They growled together, they bled together, and they proved that the language of the pack is older and stronger than fear." He turned toward Aden and Sarek, standing shoulder to shoulder at the front of the formation. "Their story will be told to every new recruit who passes through these halls, not as a legend of war, but as a lesson that strength is not in claws or in weapons, but in trust, in the bond that says, 'I see you, I know you, and I choose to stand with you.'" Aden felt Sarek's shoulder press against his. The young Cathar's tail swayed lazily, a sign of deep contentment. "We started with a growl," Aden whispered. "And we ended with a pack," Sarek replied. Above them, the stars were beginning to pierce the evening sky, silent witnesses to a new chapter in the history of two species who were no longer enemies, nor allies, but something far deeper. They were family. They were pack, and their story had only just begun.